that excellent overview by Professor Kanali on the problem of democracy in Islam. It's my pleasure to be moderator for this first session with three outstanding people who have something to say on the subject. My role is simply moderator, and for the question and answer session, I shall endeavor to be impartial and democratic. But this is an academic venue, and we have the hope to raise the level of discourse. And so we wish to avoid political speeches and grandstanding. So part of my job will be to ensure that the discussion is at that level. I want to introduce each speaker separately. They will have 20 minutes, but I'm liberal in time. The first is our esteemed colleague and well-known individual, Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa, who is the brains behind this session, actually. He has a distinguished career as a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he had attained his Master's of Medicine in Surgery in 2000. He has also been a lecturer and surgeon at University of Science Malaysia, and he worked in the Department of Cardiothoracic Surgery in Monash Medical Center. He was trained not just as a surgeon, but has a lifelong academic and activist interest in social issues, and has been actively involved in social work as an Islamic worker and activist for just causes. He is a founding member of the Muslim Professionals Forum, MPF, and currently the chairman of the Islamic Renaissance Front, IRF, whose activities have gained a great deal of attention and esteem in the last few years. He has, in a sense, been the moving force behind this newly launched intellectual think tank, and a guidance and a beacon for younger Muslim Malay intellectuals who are interested in committing their activities towards a social purpose. I'm glad to welcome him here to address the topic of Islam and democracy. What is the real problem? Dr. Farouk.
Mr. Chairman, Professor Muhammad Hashim Kamali, CEO of IAS, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, Political Secretaries and Secretaries of Foreign Embassies, Professors, Lecturers, Ladies and Gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we'll discuss a very interesting topic about Islam and democracy. There has been an ongoing debate about this topic that I guess it is a debate that never ends. Probably started after the decision by many Islamists to participate in elections, general elections, and participate in the process of democracy. And as usual, that we see that there are always two extremes. One would be the Democrats who believe that Islam in itself is a democratic religion, and has been explained by Professor Hashim Kamali in the Quran itself. From our reading, we find a lot of verses that show that Islam is democratic in nature. You know, so many references can be said, and of course the most oft quoted would be the verse quoted by Prof. Hashim just now, wa amruhum shura bainahum, and they had mutual consultation regarding their matters, right? So I would say that this relationship, however, is a very complex relationship. It is complex because Islam itself is not monolithic. Nobody can claim to talk and to represent Islam as a whole. No, we have Jakim type of Islam, Jais type of Islam, and we have so many types of Islam in this country, right? So nobody can always say that, no, I'm speaking the truth, I'm speaking for Islam, and this is what Islam should be. You know, Islam should be like this, and everything else should be considered deviant. This is an autocratic faith of Islam, Islam that has been institutionalized in our society. As I said just now, there are two extremes, people who believe in democracy and people who don't believe in democracy. And there are even countries, Muslim majority countries, who actually say they support democracy, but in actual sense, there is no democracy at all in that country. This particular country is an example, a good example, where it was claimed to be the best democracy in the world, but we see a very, flawed kind of elections that we're having, and flawed kinds of electoral rolls, and so on and so forth. I won't go further because I am perhaps biased, being a steering committee member per se. But anyway, let's just look at what we call as the democracy index. Right? The latest democracy index, which they have been published, and they divided these countries into 4 categories: full democracies, flawed democracies, hybrid regimes, and authoritarian regimes. And they look into several aspects. One is the electoral process and pluralism. Second is the functioning government. Third is the political participation. Fourth is the political culture. And fifth is the civil liberties. Now, these are the 5 fundamental aspects that they look upon. And we see that based on this democracy index, the latest democracy index, none of the so-called Muslim countries are among the top of the countries that can be considered to have full democracy. Which are the countries? The countries are mainly the Scandinavian countries. Norway, followed by Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, then of course, my favorite, New Zealand. And where can you find Malaysia? Is ranked 71 out of the 167 countries under flawed democracy. And if you look at the country that's being called as an Islamic country, the true Islamic country, Saudi Arabia, what is the ranking of Saudi Arabia? Is 161 out of 167 under authoritarian regime. Are we proud of that? And yet there are many Malaysians who say that, Saudi Arabia is a good example of a democratic country. I don't understand how they came up to that conclusion. Now, the thing is that I would say that this relationship has been debated a long time ago, and probably in the early 20th century by Islamists like Hassan al-Banna, Syed Hassan al-Banna, and Said Qutb, and so on and so forth. The problem is that those who are against the democracy would consider it to be power of the people to usurp the power of God, to usurp the power of God. And that is why democracy is totally incompatible with Islam. Because in Islam, the sovereignty belongs to God alone. And in democracy, sovereignty belongs to the people. So how can sovereignty belong to the people? How could we reconcile between the two? But then, some other prominent Islamic intellectuals argue that Islam and democracy are compatible. Some extend the argument to affirm that under the condition of this contemporary world, democracy can be considered a requirement for Islam. In these discussions, Muslim scholars bring historically important concepts from within the Islamic tradition itself together with the concept of democracy as understood in the modern world. For example, let me quote what Rashid Ghanouchi, the leader of An-Nahda in Tunisia, he said, verbatim, if by democracy is meant the liberal model of government prevailing in the West, a system under which people freely choose their representatives and leaders, in which there is an alternation of power, as well as all freedoms and human rights for the public, then Muslims will find nothing in their religion to oppose democracy, and it is not in their interest to do so. Those were the words of Rashid Ghanouchi. Now, as I said that, like this conflict between democracy and Islam, has been perhaps explained very well by Nader Hashimi in his book, Islam, Secularism and Liberal Democracy. When he said that, the tension arises when you speak about democracy and you draw a line, a horizontal line, humans to human. And religion or Islam itself is basically a vertical relationship between man and God. So when these two lines meet, then you will see this point of friction. The problem is when people of members of society, the so-called the pious people, seek to interject their vertical relationship with God into the horizontal public sphere as a way of regulating human dealings, right? So that's why we see that, even in certain states, well, I will not name those states, people talk about moral laws or moral conduct, like how women should dress and things like that, They're very particular about all these small matters, rather than thinking about equality, to give economic equality to the masses. The problem is because they say that, religion claims to have a universal truth, and they speak on behalf of God, because basically, as they always say, al-ulama warasatul anbiya, the scholars who are basically the heirs of the prophets. So they have the moral right to exert their power. The problem is that this ideological rigidity basically undermines tolerance, pluralism, and compromise all the critical aspects of democratic politics. This is why there is a need for democratic people who believe in democracy, for there to be a separation between religion from politics, or what Professor Hashim Kamali said just now about something about secularism, which we'll probably discuss in another forum. Religion is exclusionary because it sets up a boundary, between believers and non-believers, Muslims, non-Muslims, right? Whereas democracy is inclusive in nature, egalitarian, and non-discriminatory. So can you see the contradictory in between the two? And citizenship is not based on adherence to God, but rather our membership in a political society. And look at this Malaysian experience nowadays. People are trying to reduce the non-Muslims to become second-class citizens, for example. Right? And the problem with the, the religiosity of some politicians is that they are trying to collapse the distinction between the vertical and the horizontal axis, and drag God from heavenly heights and interjecting it into the center of public debate. So everything or anything that we debate about, then God has to be there. We drag God, and what God says, So there is no debate, because like you always drag God in whatever debate. And I had this experience on BFM 89.9 where we are talking about polygamy, and the other side, she started to say, according to God, this is this, and like I question, why do we have to drag God all the time? Then where is the rational argument? Where is rationality? The rationalism that Professor Hashim Kamali mentioned just now. The problem with this is that when you have this kind of mix-up, then it poses a major danger to the minorities, be it religious minorities or even sexual minorities, be it Shiites or Baha'is or any other minorities, or even any other sexual minorities. I would like to touch a little bit about what concept of Tawheed or Islam is all about, because we know that the basis foundation of Islam is the concept of Tawheed or oneness. However, Ali Shariati put it nicely. Ali Shariati, the late Ali Shariati, we consider him as the architect of the Iranian Revolution, said Tawheed as a worldview means regarding the whole universe as a unity, instead of dividing it into this world and the hereafter, into spirit and body. So no man can monopolize to be speaking on behalf of God. In this way, it is argued that the doctrine of Tawheed virtually requires a democratic system, because humans are all created equal, and any system that denies that equality is not Islamic. I hope this is very clear, right? So if we see that Islam is based on Tawheed, then we must embrace democracy. We must embrace equality, right? We must be against any form of racism, any form of sectarianism. Man in the Quran has been described of the Khalif of God, as the Khalif of God. And why are they considered as Khalif of God? It was mentioned in the Holy Quran, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, and we had endowed dignity, to the children of Adam, and we have dignified the children of Adam. Muhammad Asad in his tafsir, the message of the Quran, specifically mentioned that the reason for human to have this status is merely because of reason. It's merely because of aql, reason that was given by God to them. So meaning to say, I would like to reiterate what Professor Hashim Kamali mentioned just now, is that in trying to form a political system, in order for us to govern a government, it must be based not solely on text, but also on reason. I remember Rashid Kanushi mentioned in his book, he said that Al-Quran to reason is like eyes to light. The eyes will not be able to see without any light. Similarly, light will be of no use if there are no eyes. So it must go hand in hand, right? Quran and reason. That's the most important thing. As has been mentioned by the chairman just now, that the problem we're having now is that this the struggle between the two, right? And how do I say, whether which one should win. It's a political contest between the Democrats and those who believe in the authoritarian phase of Islam. And of course, this could be seen from the previous history of what we call as Islamism, by Shahid Said Qutb from his time, until what happened after the Arab Spring, what we call as post-Islamism. The concern of the Islamism project would be, at that time, was not so much on social development, all right, but on building an ideological community, or establishing an Islamic state, or implementing Islamic laws and moral codes. They believe that by doing this, the poor can expect to profit from an Islamic moral trickle down. And we have seen this even in Malaysia, right? And this is very well documented in Professor Farouk's book, Islam Embedded, about the history of past, which I believe Dr. Zul is well versed about it. But what is post-Islamism? Post-Islamism refers to a political and social condition in which, after a phase of experimentation, the appeal, energy, and sources of legitimacy of Islamism get exhausted, even among its once ardent supporters. Islamists become aware of their system's anomalies and inadequacies, and they attempt to normalize and institutionalize their rule. So, as Professor Hashim Kamali said just now, Islam is no longer al-Islam huwa al-hal, solution to all problems. It's no longer like that. In post-Islamism, Islam is not considered to be a solution to all problems. We have to be pragmatic in our approach, and to understand, to reconcile our contradictions, and to reinvent ourselves. The whole project is basically to marry Islam with individual choice and freedom, with democracy and modernity. I would like to quote what Asif Bayat says. He's a leading scholar about this post-Islamism. He said that post-Islamism is expressed in such beliefs that we don't mind demolishing mosques in order to build freeways. Now, say that to Perkasa. I think, So, in conclusion, Islamism is defined by the fusion of religion and responsibility, whereas post-Islamism emphasizes religiosity and rights. Rights of the minorities, whether they are religious or sexual minorities, and also the most important is the equal citizenship to everyone, irrespective of race and creed, and that non-Muslims should never be reduced to second-class citizens. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
1001 thanks, Dr. Farouk, for your enlightening presentation and also for keeping within the time limit. He says we need to be pragmatic, we need to be practical. We need to reinvent ourselves. We need a reconciliation with modernity. He looks forward to a post-Islamism, a new stage in the thinking about how Islam exists in the present context of our globalized world. And he also points out that Tawheed itself, the very concept of Islamic oneness, virtually requires a democratic system, whether it was realized in the past as an egalitarian system of justice and socioeconomic equity, or whether it still has to be realized today in our own time. Thank you, Dr. Farouk.